first rule when you set out to make a small, cheap car is to try not make it look like a small, cheap car. On that front, I think Mazda's off to a pretty darn good start. Let's drive this 2014 Mazda 3 5-door S Grand Touring and check the tech. Now, the first thing I love about this Mazda 3 is the look and the quality of the cabin materials. This is kind of Audi-esque on a much better budget. Nice looking understated trim. This is the new Mazda look. It's tack-centric, a little digital speedo in the corner, and everything else is pushed out as a periphery. Now, of course, the next thing that grabs your eye is this. This is an all-new look and feel for them. It's the now in vogue in the industry toaster slot tablet-style head unit screen. You've got apps, your media, luckily all in one place. Thank you, Mazda. No one else seems to do that. Communication, navigation, and your overall settings. And here's your source list. It's all the hits that you need. AM, FM with HD radio, satellite, AHA, Pandora, and Stitcher apps are built in, but you have to launch them on your phone to get this to talk. Bluetooth streaming, USB, optical disc, of course. Everything is done from a controller down here with home buttons for major functions. Little Audi-like volume knob to the right. Unfortunately, it's kind of surrounded by other knobs. It's really kind of hard to operate. I wish they'd make it taller or wider or something. When you're driving, you see the speed limit show up here in the left corner of the screen. That's really good. And if you exceed the speed limit, it turns red and yellow to remind you. That's something very cool. I don't think I've seen that before. Navigation entry is pretty easily done via the controller or via the voice button over here. Unfortunately, when you hit the voice button, you don't get really clear prompts on the screen what you can or should say. On the other hand, you can enter the destination as one blurb from street number to state without having to go bucket by bucket. That's commendable. On the other hand, when you want to turn down the voice guidance, which I often don't use, get this. The voice stops talking, it's muted, but it still mutes the left side of the audio system when it would have been talking. That makes no sense. I can't believe that actually made it out of production. It's infuriating as hell. One thing I am missing here is there is no live internet search to destination like you'll find in a BMW, Mercedes, Audi, no Google in other words. You'd have to know the address or use the POI database, and those are never very good. And as you're going to start to notice here, there are an incredible number of settings I haven't seen on most other cars. That spooks the average driver. I'm not a big fan of things like calling focus of the HUD calibration. Just call it focus. An incredible number of traffic settings, including something called detour sensitivity. I do this for a living and I have no idea what that is. Traffic is forked in two sessions. There's online traffic, which requires a Wi-Fi hotspot device hooked up to the car. And then under apps, you've got HD radio delivered traffic, which is a separate traffic map that's not part of the navigation screen. So this is kind of a scattered mess of too many choices, too much gobbledygook and jargon, and not enough unifications. Fuel economy monitor is interesting. The cars that have IE-Loop, the dumbest trade name in the auto business, actually have regenerative braking, which is not uncommon, but in this case they use an alternator that can run at 12 or even higher volts to charge a capacitor, not the battery. That's really high-tech stuff. We'll explain the use of capacitors versus batteries in a future Car Tech 101 on CNET on Cars. We have the optional Bose center point with audio pilot noise canceling. I gotta say, this system did a really good job with tortured signals like satellite radio. Brought them up clean without a lot of that artifacty sibilance, so big up on that. Now, you may have noticed we've got a little projection screen that winks up off the dash when you start the car, and there's sort of a blue electrofluorescent camera under there, giving us a pretty rudimentary display. The problem we had was the thing is very uneven. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the height control actually does something, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the image just goes up and out, and I couldn't get it back. We've also got blind spot detection. Like the lane departure, it's passive. Little indicators light up in the mirrors. Adaptive cruise control on this car. That means it'll maintain speed and distance ahead. There is no assisted parking on this car. You do get a rear view camera. Sensors, though, oddly enough, are optional. Now, under the hood, this Mazda 3, because it's an S, a sport model, has a 2.5-liter inline-4. The I-Cars will have a 2-liter inline-4. But what they have in common is something called Sky-Active technology. In a nutshell, that means it's a really high compression engine, almost at diesel levels of compression. 184 horsepower, 185 foot-pounds of torque. 0 to 60 for this 3,000-pound car is a respectable 7.5 seconds. Notice that 3,000 pounds is pretty light by today's standards. MPG is 2737. Transmission and drivetrain are straightforward. 6-speed automatic only, and a real automatic, not a CVT, and front-wheel drive only.
The thing feels like it's put together like a drum. There's not a rattle in the car, and I'm on a crappy waterfront road right now, so that's saying something. Now here's the odd thing. The engine does not feel as good to me as it looks on paper. I don't get a lot in that 20 to 80% of pedal travel. It just kind of gets stuck in unbearably tall gears. In fact, I'll tell you, I thought it was a CVT when I first drove the car. You know, I never look at the spec sheet till I've driven the car for a while, and I would not have bet it was an automatic. The head-up display is kind of badly positioned because it puts the data, the text that's on it, right over the arm of the wiper, which is a busy background, and it's not my favorite positioning for a HUD. It's actually kind of out of my line of sight. I think you could put that stuff in the dash and it would be just as good.
Okay, let's price our Mazda 3. This is pretty much top of the line loaded, so we're looking at $27,300 for an S 2.5 liter Grand Touring trim that brings in nav and a bunch of other tech. Then on top of that, we're going to add $2,600 for the Grand Touring Tech package. That adds the iE-Loop capacitor-based regeneration system, kind of high-tech stuff. Lane departure warning, blind spot warning, adaptive cruise control. Other options include rear sensors, oddly enough, are a la carte at $450, and remote start is $575. You're a little over $30,000 for this guy loaded up. And the cabin tech, as I showed you, is kind of getting out in front of its skis and definitely has some bugs that need to be worked out. Overall, though, they've got a serious contender in the sector.